The story begins more than 3,000 years ago. In the shifting landscapes of the ancient Near East, tribes wandered across the deserts of Mesopotamia and the hill country of Canaan, carrying with them traditions, languages, and gods that shaped their identities. Among these tribes emerged a group known in later writings as the Hebrews. The word Hebrew itself, Ivri in Hebrew, has puzzled scholars for centuries. Some believe it derives from the root meaning to cross over, suggesting that the Hebrews were people who had crossed rivers, borders, and lands. Others connect it to the term Habiru or Apiru, a name found in Egyptian and Mesopotamian records, referring to wandering peoples, outlaws, or mercenaries living on the margins of great empires. The Hebrew identity in its earliest form was not a political nation nor a settled people. They were pastoralists, shepherds, and clan-based families tracing their lineage back to legendary ancestors. Later tradition remembers these ancestors as Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, figures who embodied the idea of wandering faith, migration, and covenant with a single God. Abraham is described as having left the great Mesopotamian city of Ur, crossing over into Canaan, symbolizing both a physical migration and a spiritual journey. His descendants carried this identity as Ivrim, Hebrews, wanderers who lived between powerful nations but claimed their own destiny. The Hebrew identity deepened with the stories of the patriarchs. Jacob, later renamed Israel, would become the father of 12 sons, each said to be the progenitor of one of the 12 tribes of Israel. In these tribal stories, the transition from Hebrews to Israelites begins. At this stage, identity was rooted not in statehood or territory, but in family and covenant. They were Hebrews because they were wanderers, connected by shared ancestry. They were Israelites because they traced descent from Jacob, Israel. These dual terms overlap in the early texts, revealing that identity was fluid, shaped by circumstance. But another defining moment awaited: the migration to Egypt and the experience of oppression and slavery. The Hebrews of the patriarchal stories became the Israelites of the Exodus tradition. The Exodus story, central to Jewish tradition, tells of a people enslaved in Egypt, liberated by Moses and forged into a nation through covenant at Mount Sinai. Here, the identity of Israelites took center stage. To be an Israelite was to belong to a covenant people bound by divine law. The Ten Commandments and the Torah marked the shift from clan-based wanderers to a collective nation with moral, legal, and ritual frameworks. This was not merely an ethnic designation. It was a spiritual political identity rooted in their relationship with Yahweh, the God who had revealed himself to them. The conquest and settlement of Canaan reinforced this identity. The Israelites established themselves among older Canaanite populations, sometimes blending, sometimes clashing. Archaeology suggests that many early Israelites were in fact indigenous Canaanites who adopted a distinct Yahwistic religion and identity, separating themselves from their neighbors. By the time of the Judges, and later with the monarchy under Saul, David, and Solomon, the Israelites were no longer just wanderers or tribes. They were a kingdom, with Jerusalem as its capital and the temple as its spiritual center. The reign of King David and his son Solomon marked the high point of Israelite unity. Under David, Jerusalem became the political and religious heart of the kingdom. Under Solomon, the Grand Temple housed the Ark of the Covenant, symbolizing divine presence. But unity did not last. After Solomon's death, the kingdom split into two: the northern kingdom, called Israel, and the southern kingdom, called Judah. This division introduced another layer of identity. The people of the north were Israelites in the strict sense, carrying the name of the kingdom. The people of the south, centered around Jerusalem and the temple, became known as Judeans, or in later Greek, Iudaioi, which would evolve into the English word Jews. The northern kingdom fell first, conquered by the Assyrians in 722 BCE. Its people were exiled, scattered, and largely lost to history, remembered as the 10 lost tribes of Israel. The survivors of identity were those in the south, the Judeans. It was in this crucible of survival that the term Jew began to emerge as a distinct marker. Though still Israelites in descent, their identity was increasingly tied to Judah, Jerusalem, and the temple cult. In 586 BCE, the Babylonian Empire crushed Judah, destroyed Solomon's temple, and exiled its elites to Babylon. This catastrophe marked another profound shift. Without a land or a temple, what did it mean to be the people of Israel? It was during the Babylonian exile that identity transformed again. The people began to be called Judeans or Jews, emphasizing their tribal and territorial origin. More importantly, the exile forced them to preserve their traditions in texts, rituals, and community practices. The return from exile allowed by the Persians saw the rebuilding of the temple and the re-establishment of Jerusalem. But the identity of the people had changed forever. They were no longer simply Israelites defined by land and monarchy. They were Jews, defined by their faith, their covenant, and their adherence to Torah, even in diaspora. In the centuries that followed, under Persian, Greek, and Roman rule, the Jewish identity continued to crystallize. The Torah, the synagogue, and the community became the anchors of survival. While Hebrew referred increasingly to the ancient language and the ancestral past, and Israelite to a vanished kingdom, Jew became the enduring name of the people. Through centuries of exile, persecution, and diaspora, the term Jew remained the dominant identity. Yet the older terms did not vanish. Hebrew survived as a literary and linguistic designation, especially with the revival of the Hebrew language in the modern era. Israelite continued in religious texts and traditions, remembered as the ancestral foundation. In the modern period, the establishment of the State of Israel in 1948 reconnected the ancient names. Citizens of Israel today are Israelis, but within Jewish tradition they see themselves as descendants of the Israelites and Hebrews of old. Thus the three terms, Hebrew, Israelite, and Jew, are not separate peoples, but stages in the unfolding story of one people across millennia. They mark the journey from wandering tribes to a united kingdom, to a community defined by faith, and finally to a modern nation with deep ancient roots.